So now, chapter 17 of The Secret of Shadow Ranch, an interrupted program. Before Nancy could say anything to the two men, Bess's voice rang out. "She's not going with you." "Let her go," George ordered. As Bercy whirled in surprise, Nancy jerked her wrist from his grasp. Diamond's startled look changed to a scowl, and the two ran away fast, disappearing under the grandstand. "Girls, you were wonderful," Nancy exclaimed, recovering from her shock. "But those men must be caught." The three friends dashed after the fugitives, all the while looking for a deputy, but saw none. Finally, they gave up the chase. The two men had vanished. "I'll go to the sheriff's office and report this," Nancy said. "Not alone," George declared. "We're sticking close to you for the rest of the afternoon. It's a good thing I let Bess talk me into coming down for a hot dog." Bess thought she had better go back to Alice, who was holding their seats in the grandstand. George accompanied Nancy to Sheriff Curtis's office, where the young sleuth left a note for the absent lawman about the kidnapping attempt. When they returned to the rodeo arena, they heard a burst of cheering. "Dave just won the roping contest!" cried Alice as Nancy and George took their seats. The delighted girls clapped loudly. Bud was good too, Bess put in loyally, as Dave walked back to the judge's stand. Modestly, he accepted the first prize, a pair of silver spurs, and left the arena to another burst of applause. Next came the Bronco Busters. The girls watched, thrilled, as one after another of the contestants hurtled into the arena on the bucking horses. Shorty came last. Shrill whistles filled the air as he tried to stick in the saddle for the required number of minutes. "Look at him, Sunfish!" came a shout from the stands as the frantic horse pitched high into the air, his back arched. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the judge's stand. "Time's up! Shorty won!" George exclaimed. The stands erupted into cheers. At the same time, the bronc shook his rider loose. The winner rolled over in the dust, picked himself up, retrieved his hat, and waved at the spectators. As the bronc was shunted out of the arena by attendants, Shorty strode to the judge's stand. He claimed his prize, a silver buckle, and held it up for all to see. Then he swaggered out of the arena. After the rodeo, the girls met their dates outside the front gate. Tex introduced his brother Jack, a tall, freckle-faced boy whose friendly manner immediately put Alice at ease. Quickly, Nancy warned the boys about Bercy and Diamond. Dave looked worried, and Jack spoke up. "I don't know what all this is about, but no one will get Alice away from me until I turn her over to Nancy after the dance." Nancy and Dave led the way to the ranch wagon. "Shorty said he'd come along later," he remarked. On the drive to the barbecue grounds, Nancy quietly told him her deduction about the treasure. Dave was excited and said he hoped she was right. About a mile beyond Tumbleweed, he parked in a grove of willow trees beside a narrow stream. The grounds were set with many long wooden tables and benches, and overhead were strings of small electric lights. "Come on, gals," said Tex. "We're going to put in a big feed." He led them toward a long serving table. 4 men passed by, each carrying a shovel bearing a big burlap rack package. These were dumped onto the table. "There goes the meat," said Bud. "It's been buried in the barbecue pit since last night." "Cooking nice and slow over hot stones," Tex added. When the burlap fell away, the fragrance of the steaming meat was irresistible, as the girls enjoyed generous servings with spicy relish and potato salad. By the time they had finished the desserts of ice cream and Nancy's chocolate cake, the colored lights overhead had come on. A stout, middle-aged man mounted the dance platform in the center of the grove and announced that he was the master of ceremonies. Seeing Bud's guitar, he called on him for some cowboy songs. Bud played "I'm a Lonesome Cowboy," and everyone joined in enthusiastically. He followed with a number of other old favorites. Finally, he strummed some Gold Rush songs, including "Sweet Betsy from Pike." The cheers and applause had not died down when Shorty stepped onto the platform. Ignoring the master of ceremonies, he leaned toward the microphone and said, "Folks, how'd you like me to do my imitations?" At the scattered hand clapping and whistles, the stout man nodded and stepped back. Shorty cupped his hands around his mouth, closed his eyes, and the long, mournful hoot of an owl filled the night. "He's really good," Bess whispered. "I'll bet he can also do a whining dog," Nancy said meaningfully. Next, the cowboy announced a coyote and produced several realistic howls. Suddenly, in mid-howl, he spotted Nancy in the audience. His jaw dropped, and he stood silent before the microphone. Staring at her, he stammered that his act was over and left the platform. The girls exchanged baffled glances. Dave grinned. That was one surprised coyote, all right. He thought his pals had gotten rid of you, Nancy. Just then, a band of 3 musicians began tuning up, and a square dancing contest was announced. Alice suggested that the 4 couples enter as a set, and the others agreed enthusiastically. Of the 4 groups in the contest, Nancy's was called first. The young people lined up on the platform, facing each other in couples. At the sound of the lively music, they began to dance. The fiddle player called the steps and played his tunes fast. "Swing your partners and a do-si-do." Whirling past the edge of the platform, Nancy glimpsed Shorty glowering at her. When the breathless dancers returned to their table, Nancy told the others of the incident. "It's going to be hard to shake Shorty from now on. I'm afraid he and his pals will watch us so closely we'll have no chance to go after the treasure." While the other sets of dancers competed, Nancy pondered on how to make sure the girls were not followed to the cliff houses. At the end of the contest, the crowd voted by applause, and the Shadow Ranch group won easily. Nancy was sent to the platform to claim the prize. The master of ceremonies handed her a pink slip of paper. "You take this to the food table over yonder, young lady, and they will give you and your friends a big ice-cold watermelon." Nancy thanked the man, then turned to the audience and said, "I would like to make an announcement that I believe will interest everybody in this area. My friends and I think we know where the famous long-lost Valentine treasure is hidden." An excited rustle ran through the crowd, and cries of "Where?" Nancy smiled. "I won't say anything more about it now, but tomorrow a few Shadow Ranch men are going to do some digging." As Nancy hurried from the platform, she saw Sheriff Curtis making his way toward her. He spoke of his futile search on the mountain and his regret that the desperados were still at large. "I'm glad you outwitted them this afternoon. Watch your step." Then he joined the young people at their table. George asked Nancy, "What was the meaning of that announcement you made?" In a low voice, the young sleuth said, "Everybody look happy, not as if we're talking about anything important, and I'll explain." Dave obligingly gave a broad grin. "I'll collect our prize." He soon returned and began cutting and serving the watermelon. Meanwhile, the others listened, smiling and laughing as Nancy told them about the Shadow Ranch cowboys were to act as decoys while the girls went to the cliff dwellings to search for the treasure. Shorty will no doubt alert Bercy and Diamond, and they'll be keeping an eye on the ranch. Sheriff Curtis praised Nancy for her plan and said he would follow the decoy group. "I'll nab the varmints when they move against the cowboys." His blue eyes were sober as he said, "I can see you're a capable gal, Miss Drew, but you've got to be extra careful from now on, 'cause those thieving hombres will want to keep all of you tenderfeet, quiet." "We'll stay close to the girls," Dave promised, and the cowboys permitted no one to cut in during the dancing that followed. When the party was over, Jack said goodnight to Alice at the ranch wagon and promised to telephone her soon. As Nancy and her friends climbed into the car, Shorty came hurrying up to join them. Dave drove to the corrals behind the arena, where Tex and Bud picked up the horses and trailer. Shorty got out too, and walked into a phone booth at the edge of the parking area. He did not stay long. "I'll bet he called Diamond and Bercy to tell them what I said," Nancy declared. As Dave started the drive home, Shorty questioned Nancy about her announcement. She laughed and replied that he would see later what she meant. Before he could ask any more questions, Bud struck a chord on his guitar and started a cowboy song. Shorty gave up talking and sat sullenly while the others sang all during the ride. Although she joined in the song, Nancy's thoughts dwelled on the plan that she had made for proving to Mrs. Thurman that the phantom horse was a trick. She was pleased to note that the moon had gone behind heavy clouds and the night was very dark. When they reached the ranch, the cowboys hurried off to relieve Ed Raleigh and the foreman, who had done guard duty during their absence. The girls went to the house, where they found Mrs. Raleigh in the lighted living room. Chief lay by the fireplace. "I felt safer with him in here," Aunt Bet explained. Nancy asked the others to act as company to accompany her to the kitchen. There they found Mrs. Thurman seated at the big table reading a magazine. "I believe I can show you how the phantom was made to appear," Nancy said. The cook looked skeptical, then exclaimed nervously as Nancy turned out the lights. With a mysterious smile, she slipped outside and hurried down the portico. Soon she returned. "All set? Look through the screen door." Her friends complied and stared into the darkness. Suddenly, Mrs. Thurman gave a scream, and Mrs. Raleigh gasped. Bobbing toward them, about 3 feet above the portico, were tiny glowing specks. "Oh," moaned the cook, "phantom spots! Take 'em away!" Nancy opened the door, and the shining specks floated into the room. And that's the end of chapter 17.